much honored to introduce the Dr. Jacob Nordangård, who, and I will shorten your presentation. Please come up stage. You are an academic lecturer, right?
Yes.
And you will hold a presentation on the not so hidden conspiracy of the World Economic Forum. And the floor is yours.
It's an open conspiracy, you could say. That was a book by H.G. Wells, by the way. H.G. Wells is very interesting when you look on what's happening on the world stage. He wrote science fiction, but that is not fiction anymore. The conspiracy is out in the open. Okay, my name is Jacob Nordangård, and I'm going to do a presentation now called The Shapers of the Future. And this will cover the origin, history, and how the World Economic Forum has become the major vehicle for a technocratic reshaping of humanity and the planet. I have a PhD in Science and Technology Studies from Linköping University. I'm a geographer, culture and media producer, and I'm also the founder of the Pharos Foundation, and we work to highlight threats to democracy, freedom of thought, as well as against humanity itself. I'm also the CEO of the publishing company Pharos Media Productions. I've written 5 books about the global agenda and power play. This is 3 of them. My doctoral thesis, the first one, Order of Cow, it's called, was about the European Union energy politics and the goal to create a sustainable energy system less dependent on fossil fuels. It was out in 2012, and it's very topical now. I have also written a book about the Rockefeller philanthropies and their involvement in the climate issue. And my latest book, The Global Coup d'etat, Den globala statskuppen in Swedish, covers the background to the pandemic and how it became a trigger to implement a technocratic world order. This is a quote from the political scientist Samuel Huntington. The Davos class have little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that are thankfully vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. Huntington knew what he was talking about. Himself a professor from the Harvard University, a hotbed for the creation of World Economic Forum. Huntington, he was an insider, very involved with power politics. Origins and history. In 1956, the Special Studies Project was initiated by Nelson Rockefeller at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. It was an ambitious project that addressed the problems of its day and how to solve them. Nelson, he had presidential ambitions. And he had put together a brain trust to bring his aspirations to life. The young academician Henry Kissinger from Harvard was handpicked to serve as the project's manager. Henry, he had previously been involved in a study group on nuclear weapons at the influential think tank Council on Foreign Relations, together with David Rockefeller. Nelson's brother. David, he was a banker at the Chase Manhattan Bank and a director at the council since 1949. The Council on Foreign Relations was dominated by the Rockefellers at this time and promoted their business-oriented form of internationalism. Henry Kissinger, he became a loyal partner to these Rockefeller interests and has served them ever since. The stated objective with this special studies project was to shape a new world order in all its dimensions: spiritual, economic, political, social. The challenge was, quote, to build a new structure that will make possible the fulfillment of the basic purposes of humanity. To achieve their goal, they identified science and technology as the key to further their internationalist cause. No other area required more cooperation than science. And they identified global health and climate change. This is as early as in the 50s. Especially interesting as these problems span across the borders of the globe. The panel that came up with this proposal was chaired by Milton Katz from Harvard Law School, with David Rockefeller as a member. No, the Rockefellers and climate change, the oil men and climate change is an interesting combination. The Rockefellers, they had already been instrumental in establishing the United Nations, as illustrated by this picture from their website of the Rockefeller Capital Management. You can see all these achievements that are more Rockefeller organizations, but in the middle we have United Nations that they view as their own little club or organization. Henry Kissinger, and he was also the director of Harvard's International Seminar and started the Center for International Relations in 1958. This seminar had the purpose to establish better understanding among a select group of people who will be in top leadership roles in their countries in the years ahead. The seminar was funded by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation and, as later revealed, the CIA. David Rockefeller himself, he was on the board of the overseers of Harvard and the president between 1966 and 1968. One leader of the future that came under Kissinger's influence was Klaus Schwab, a young economist from Ravensburg in Germany that had come to USA to gain a Master of Public Administration at Harvard. He was the right man for a new mission. to further the internationalist agenda and shape a global business institution. This is a clip with Klaus talking to his mentor 50 years later.
Dr. Kissinger, our time, our satellite time is running out. What wonderful opportunity to conclude our week here with such concrete proposals and ideas of how we can really create, I would say, a new world order. And I feel we should be very grateful to you, Henry, for taking the time at a very important day in the United States to be, at least digitally, with us. And on behalf of all those sitting here in the room, I would like to thank you very much. I would like to thank you personally also for the 50-year-long mentorship and all the advice you have given me. Thank you, and we appreciate it very much. Please join me.
That was Klaus talking to his master, Kissinger. And Kissinger, of course, has his masters. In 1970, Klaus Schwab founded the European Management Forum in Switzerland in order to arrange meetings and allow top managers of corporations to interact with all their stakeholders. That means shareholders, suppliers, governments, and civil society. This forum would also spread new management techniques to the Europeans. To the inaugural meeting, Klaus had invited two academians involved with Harvard's International Seminar, Kenneth Galbraith and Herman Kahn. Other notable guests were Otto von Habsburg from the Pan-European Union. Anybody know about the Pan-European Union? Have anybody heard about the Kalergi plan? Yeah. Kalergi was involved with the Pan-European Union. And also Dame Barbara Ward from Columbia University in New York. The latter was a British economist that became an early promoter of sustainable development. This was to become an integral part of the forum's agenda. Barbara wrote the book Only One Earth, The Care and Maintenance of a Small Planet, as a framework for the United Nations Conference on the Environment in Stockholm in 1972. She also worked together with the Secretary General for the conference, Maurice Strong, to convince the developing nations to go along with the agenda. They were both members of the environmental think tank Club of Rome and closely associated with the Rockefeller interests. Strong was mentoring Klaus Schwab and was for many years a member of the forum's board. At the meeting in 1973, the president of the Club of Rome, Aurelio Peccei, was invited to talk about their report Limits to Growth and the World Problematic. Due to stress with a rising population and unsustainable use of resources, it was concluded that the planet was in need of a global management to take care of the planet. The Club of Rome had been started with a grant from Peccei's boss from Fiat, Giovanni Anelli, a close business associate and friend of David Rockefeller. At the same meeting, the Davos Manifesto was drafted. It stated, among others, that the management has to serve society, It must assume the role of a trustee of a material universe for future generation. It has to use the immaterial and material resources at its disposal in an optimal way. It has to continuously expand the frontiers of knowledge in management and technology. The forum decided that the elites of the world would take the roles as stewards of the planet. This meeting was sponsored by the European Communities and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Anybody know about Prince Bernhard? He was the founder of the elitist group, the Bilderberg Group. In October 1973, the Arab countries started an oil embargo towards nations that had supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. That meant that the price of oil increased with 300%. The oil crisis was a fact. This gave support to the warnings from the Club of Rome about resource scarcity. Later, the Saudi Arabian Minister of Petroleum, Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, stated this: that Henry Kissinger had been involved and used some of his diplomatic skills to kind of incite this embargo. An eventual rise in the price had also been discussed at the Bilderberg conference in Saltsjöbaden, Sweden in May 1973. Foresight. They had a problem that needed to be solved. To further the aspirations for a global management of the planet, the elite think tank Trilateral Commission was founded by David Rockefeller in 1973. They called for a new international economic order to better manage the world. The member, US Ambassador Richard Gardner, wrote an article in the Council on Foreign Relations magazine Foreign Affairs that explained the plan as an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Gardner had been a consultant to the Rockefeller Special Studies Project. What we had in mind was a new system that was technocratic, a society built and run by scientists and engineers. A high-tech society managed like a big corporation. Technocracy Incorporated, that had started as a project at the Rockefeller Associated Columbia University in the 1930s, had developed these ideas. As Parag Khanna, a World Economic Forum disciple recently stated, if you want a better world for your children, don't hold your breath for global democratic deliberation. The worse climate scenarios get, the more decision makers will be forced into radical top-down measures overseen by technocrats, not activists. And here we see Anthony Fauci, of course. In 1975, World Future Society arranged the conference Crisis and Opportunity, the next 25 years. The vice president, but he was at the time, Nelson Rockefeller, gave an opening address. They discussed the possibilities of creating a new technocratic world civilization and how to achieve this. The futurist Warren Wager had his prescription. There is no better time to implement radical changes than after a worldwide catastrophe. It was World Club of Rome's mission to warn about such events. Shaping the future agenda. In 19 1987, the forum changed its name to the World Economic Forum. The new agenda that was come after the Cold War was discussed. Here we see Maurice Strong with science writer Joël de Rosnay. Strong, that had served as head of the United Nations Environmental Program, talked about sustainable development and global warming. Or the warm war, you could say. Whereas Rosnay, special advisor to Prime Minister of Mauritius, is known for the concept symbiont. A planetary superorganism or brain comprising of humans, nations, machines, ecosystems and networks. A cybernetic organism that the World Economic Forum wanted to bring to life. Strong was part of the United Nations Brundtland Commission together with Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. Both were members of the Trilateral Commission. Their report, Our Common Future, defined the concept of sustainable development. The inclusion of climate change in the report was initiated and funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I cover this in my book about the Rockefellers. The report was a part of a summit in Rio de Janeiro that was headed by Strong. The conference decided to implement the agenda for the 21st century, Agenda 21, and start the United Nations Climate Convention. The motto for the conference was, "In our hands." Whose hands? I think you know the answer. This is some of the guys and girls. After this big environmental meeting, they wanted to start and develop a new ethical framework for the planet. The Earth Charter Commission was born. Queen Beatrix of Netherlands, that is the daughter of Prince Bernhard, and her Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers asked Maurice Strong and the former leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to chair the commission. The West and East was bonded together. Nelson Rockefeller's son Stephen became the project's coordinator. And it's very interesting to note that Royal Dutch Shell, you know, the royals in Netherlands, they have a lot of shares in Royal Dutch Shell, of course, and the Rockefellers with Exxon. These are the guys and girls that want to create our sustainable future. Stephen also gave seed money to the Global Scenario Group in order to create scenarios for how a planetary civilization could be created. This was led by Paul Raskins from the Earth Charter Commission and a member of the Club of Rome. In 2002, they released the book The Great Transition. The cover with a globe in pieces that I put together describes what it was all about. Build back better. They assumed that a general crisis for the needed transformation could be triggered by an unprecedented pandemic. The end goal was to achieve a world union with a world court and a world regulatory authority. Klaus had already started to educate leaders for transformation. This is in Klaus Schwab's own words.
And I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.